I'll start off while people get their thoughts together and questions. So we've got kind of a wide range of things. I think just Sarah, off your presentation that we've just had there. I mean, it really this is such a huge, it was a huge story, and catastrophe and calamitous. And I wondered, with your research, and I know that you're doing a lot with the organisations, and you're working off presumably the reports that the ministry put out. Are you doing research interviews, and do you have discussions with the Ministry of Defence as well, or are you working with secondary documents for this?
No, this is thank you for that question, Luke. So as Caroline also knows, the Defence Select Committee has recently put out an inquiry on the data breach and Afghan resettlement. So most of the inquiry focuses on whether the injunction was proportional or not, whether the government took timely action and appropriate action in the wake of the data breach, and then looking at the impact of the data breach also on UK citizens and trust among UK citizens, but of course also among Afghan citizens. And so because I've previously given evidence to the Defence Select Committee immediately after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and also back in, I think, 2018, when they were looking at the resettlement of interpreters specifically, I received an email asked me whether we would be interested in providing evidence again. And so I've teamed up with Refugee Legal Support, a charity, as well as an academic colleague. And for that, we have a very short time frame. The deadline of that call for written evidence is the 14th of October. We have made a survey where we are asking people about the impact of the data breach, and we have received more than 300, I think more than 350 responses. And we are currently analyzing both the quantitative as well as the qualitative data. But just the way the Defence Select Committee works means that you first have to provide them with the data before you can make the other data public. And that's why we haven't made it public, but we're working on a bigger report on that. So that will be, in a sense, in dialogue with the government, because the Select Committee, as you know, has members of parliament from all the different parties.
Yeah. I wonder, sort of connecting the two papers here. There's a kind of sense of the unknown about the Taliban's operational infrastructure to be able to enact punishment on those whose data has been breached. And I wondered whether there was a crossover in Caroline's work, but thinking about the kind of psychological factors that are kind of impacting people. Like, there's this element of, on the one hand, the kind of accessing services in the UK, the sense of de-skilling, the sort of barring of language, the trauma of things that have happened in the past. But then you have this like next wave of concern. I wondered whether that aspect of your work, Sarah, seeped into some of the testimonies and things that your informants had to say, Caroline.
Yeah, I mean, I can add a bit to that, because obviously there was so much positive about that sense of security. There was a sort of immediate relief of being out of Afghanistan. But of course, many of the families are still in direct daily contact with family members back in Afghanistan or Pakistan, and that trauma is very much alive for them. And so the sense, in a way, that the programs offer that security for those people is very partial, and particularly I think that speaks to those who have children who are slightly older, so wouldn't necessarily be counted, but actually are still left behind. So in their late teens, early 20s, and many of the families are still in contact with those people. So the sense that actually, they're not removed in any way, shape or form from what's going on. And yeah, I think there's definitely a compounding that's going on. we need to explore more into our data, but there's a really curious mix between, on one hand, immediate relief, security, but also these ongoing traumas that as Sarah's paper picked up.
And I think, sorry, Caroline.
No, carry on, please.
No, I'm just thinking that maybe what Caroline and I have failed to mention so far is that the AFM route, additional family route, so where people could apply for additional family members who were either extremely vulnerable or subject to risk because of association with the principal applicant. So let's say the Taliban threatening a brother of an interpreter because the interpreter is now in the UK and therefore kind of targeting him, which in the Afghan context is quite common. That scheme was closed in the way that it existed just a few weeks before this announcement about the data breach was made. And at the same time, also just a few weeks before the announcement of the data breach was made, the Afghan Relocation and Assistance Program, as well as the ACRS, which is the other resettlement program, were also closed. So what happened was that people got this new information and started to think again about things that had happened to them in the past or that had happened to them and their family members, but they couldn't respond by way of applying to kind of safe and legal routes because simultaneously they had just been closed by the government. So I guess from an Afghan perspective, right, that month of July kind of offered a kind of closure and moment of concern on very many different levels.
Definitely. Yeah.
It's you think if they say that the withdrawal from Afghanistan was the death of Euro-American interventionism, and if that wasn't, then certainly the data breach might have sealed the deal in terms of trust building in other countries. I mean,
yeah, it's very interesting as well about sort of the logic, however, of why that the schemes are still being supported by the Ministry of Defence. It is very much about continuing that logic, in the sense that for the Ministry of Defence, there's a kind of moral imperative to look after those who've stood alongside British forces, but there's also a future aspect that actually they need to be seen to be doing to be supporting those who've worked with them, and that we have actually done some research in government departments, and that is the logic.
Yeah, and I think really important point by Caroline. I mean, I think for me that was always my entry point for the research. I was not just looking at the Afghan scheme, but also at Iraqi resettlement schemes, and my kind of motivation was that this has a longer precedent, right? We can think of Vietnam, but we can also even think of colonial interventions where imperial powers were always dependent on having local staff, locally engaged staff, whether informally as interpreters or whether more formally. And that kind of position of then being seen as a kind of traitor translator is something that goes back literally to people like Pocahontas or La Malinche in the Mexican context, where the Spanish conquistadors needed her as an interpreter. And I think, my expectation is also that it will happen again in the future. And so on my slide, my first slide, you may have seen also the logo of LSI, which stands for Local Staff International, which is a new international NGO that we have founded that looks at the protection of locally employed staff more broadly, because they often fall between the cracks of international humanitarian law, kind of refugee law, immigration law, and employment law, even though this is a very essential group of people whose work is absolutely indispensable, and the MOD recognizes that. But what we see is that their lives sometimes may look like they're expendable. And I think that tension between their indispensable work, but the expendability of their lives is something that I kind of more broadly feel we need to address.
Yeah, can you share a link in the chat for the organization for LSI?
Yeah, I will.
That'd be great. And Huri's got a question. Caroline, I have more questions to ask you about food and eateries as well, for your population. But Huri, please jump in.
Hello again. Sorry I cut you off. Look, it was just like I have massive questions. Thank you so much to both of you for sharing all of your hard work. They are really amazing, and it opened up a new window that I'm still seeking in and understanding it. But there were a couple of ideas that you came across. First of all, this is really scary, the MOD. It's leaked out. Have they done any management system? I do understand that they understand what is so sensitive, but how they're going to take action for the future and how they're going to prevent it. That's something that has scared me. Have they talked about it? Did they take action? But the fact that they didn't talk about it for a long time, was that deliberately, or what was the idea? What is it happening that I don't understand it? For me, UK is home. And seeing that this is happening, it's just very scary for me. And what was their internal view, how they reacted to it? Was there any support that they gave afterwards? It's so like, I don't know, it's just so much shocking for me to understand and see how it goes with this process, because I'm working on Iranian case and they're giving the protection of my participants. But now looking at these bridge, how am I going to trust them? And this might happen for us as well. It's a little bit, because is there any psychology, security support or anything they have done or anything at all?
No, there's not. Huri, very excellent question. So much to say. I've shared in the chat the report or kind of statement of the Information Commissioner Office, and they report on how there has been an investigation of how this could happen and what measures the MOD has taken, has put in place for an avoidance of this to happen again. So there has been action by the MOD in terms of improving the security of their data. But at the same time, of course, the volume of the data breaches will still mean that many people are concerned. The major action that they took was to set up this secret hidden covert operation, the Afghan response route, to bring a select group of people who had been affected by the data breach out of Afghanistan into the UK. And there's still, as the minister has said, a few people who have been offered relocation under that route who are now waiting to be resettled to the UK. So that's the kind of biggest, and that is a substantial operation that the MOD has committed to. It's a costly operation. The questions that would be raised is more about, as you said, the wider impact of people who may already be in the UK. So resettlement is not what they need, but they may indeed need mental health support, as well as those people who have not been offered relocation. And at the moment, it's not entirely clear how the selection process has been taking place. I don't know, unless Caroline knows more about this, in terms of what triaging has happened in terms of deciding who's more at risk and who is less at risk as a result of the data breach, given that the spreadsheet itself didn't differentiate the data necessarily. Caroline, I'm sure you want to come in as well.
Well, I mean, to be honest, I don't know that. We have been talking with the government departments, but that aspect, like many things, are still shrouded in mystery. So yeah, I can't shed light on that triaging process. But I think it's a really important question, because in general we know that with the schemes that there are those questions around eligibility. And I think also something that's really important to mention, and we haven't mentioned here, is the fact that many other Afghans who, for many reasons, have sought to come via irregular routes. And so there's a much larger proportion of asylum seekers, Afghan asylum seekers, who haven't come in under the resettlement schemes, but to all intents and purposes have the same claims. But I think that's also important to recognize within this, that when we are talking about resettlement, relocation, it is in some ways it is the privileged few and even, you know, the ways in which those are chosen in some ways, yeah, there are issues and challenges around who gets chosen and who doesn't.
Yeah, I think really important
that
point that Caroline made. I mean, when the MOD closed the ARP and ACRS scheme, they had to do a risk assessment, and as part of that risk assessment, they did indicate that small boat arrivals may increase because, of course, the moment you close safe and legal routes, people who are very desperate may move elsewhere. But it was not entirely clear from that very short public risk assessment how they're actually mitigating against that risk. And so I think what Caroline has underlined here is crucial.
It is. Thank you for your answers. And the next question would be, is there anything that we can do? Is it like a trainee that we can teach them to be aware if a leaking happens again, what they have to do? So prepare them for the next leaking, perhaps, or anything that they go through a danger or a challenge that they're facing.
I mean, I would actually say, but I'm basing myself here primarily on my research with Afghan interpreters who work for the British Army, but they are very aware of their security and the risks anyways. Because even when they worked for the British Army, many of them, of course, were subject to attacks. For instance, when they went on leave, or even when they just entered the base on a daily basis, they were also acutely aware of the risks after their employment. So before 2021, and as I said, many people waited for years before they finally got resettled. While they were working for the British Army in Afghanistan, they also received some security advice, including things such as, you know, don't save certain numbers in your phone with British names, etc., etc. Check your car, don't walk around with the flashy watch. But I would actually say, I mean, I put also a lot of faith in Afghans themselves. I think they are the ones who have the deepest knowledge about the risks that they face. They have the deepest knowledge about the structures of Afghan society. And I think it is important in that light for the MOD to really take seriously and listen to the assessment that Afghans themselves have of their security situation and how their risk could be mitigated, because often we think that we are the experts, but I would really say it's the Afghans who are the experts here.
And I would say also, just to add in there, Sarah, that the research that you're doing to actually generate insight into those impacts is really important. And, you know, I know it was a very nimble piece of work that you've had to do, but I think really important. So thank you for doing that.
Sorry, I agree. Obviously, it's very amazing what they are doing. But I was wondering, what can we offer as pre-SAR think tank? What do you think that it is there that is needed, and we can help them, but we are not doing it?
I sense this one might be a bigger conversation.
It's a big question, good question. I mean,
it is.
I appreciate. I appreciate, you know, I think that the question of us taking responsibility is really important. So let me think about this.
Okay. So, Kelly, I will promise that this is the last question, and then I will give the floor to the others as well. I was just wondering, you know, when you were mentioning how finding the food and connecting with the halal meat, or I don't know, even the environment that they're going through, would having pre-cultural sessions help them?
Now, this is a really important question and very interesting, because amongst some of the Afghans that we spoke to, there is this sense that actually they wish that they'd known things before. I mean, I'm quite hesitant as an anthropologist by background about these types of cultural trainings and things like that, because I do think that they can perpetuate stereotypes and there are lots of risks with them. On the other hand, there were definitely one of the big issues in our research that we'll unpack a bit more as we go on, is about the expectations and understandings on both sides of both Afghans, from what they felt that they were told and should be expected of British society, and also the realities, but that then they faced, but then also on the other hand from support services and the work that they did, and about sort of understanding, you know, the families that they were supporting. And one example of that is that, you know, they many of the local authorities that we were working with were assuming that because many of these people were working with the British, that they would be speaking English and that they would slot in seamlessly. And of course that, you know, the reality is much more complex and checkered. So it's an interesting point. I wouldn't like to say at this point that I would advocate for that kind of
I think it needs
education.
a research in it, is it?
But I think Caroline is right to emphasize also that awareness needs to come from both sides, if at all, right? I think, I mean, a very, very classical example, I'm sure I'm sure, Caroline, you have heard it and your fellow researchers have heard this, is that I think the Home Office and MOD were making efforts to provide appropriate food in the hotels for Afghan evacuees. And often what they did was they brought in Indian caterers, thinking that this was something that was kind of culturally appropriate. But Afghan food, for those of you who know it, is not very spicy at all, or not spicy, whereas Indian food is very spicy. So it was very common for people who had been evacuated to tell stories of how their children could not eat any of the food, or would only have stomach aches, and how they would, with the very limited resources they have, get some biscuits to desperately feed their children. And then there were some kind of accommodations where there was more openness for bringing in the expertise of Afghans themselves, who then even offered to organize the catering themselves, whereas other places were much more constrained in whether they were willing to do that. And that seemed to be such a simple one, which I've heard time and time again of different locations, which shows that kind of mismatch of expectations and what gets lost in translation when people are not aware of needs.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much to both of you. I really enjoyed it. And
if it's okay, from Otman. Sorry, I just want to.
I just wanted to highlight that. Can we have the report into the pre-SARS email, please? So we would be aware and analyze it. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm giving the floor. If it's up to me, I will talk till tomorrow. Thank you again.
Otman, do you want to jump in there? And then this probably has to be our last question, given the time.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to thank you for this valuable insights that you're giving us. It's really valuable, not only for the community of researchers about relocation and migration in Afghanistan, but it's also valuable for other communities working on this topic across the world. I really thank you for this valuable information. So my question is about the data. Like, since those people that are in unstable situation, usually we have data from the past. We spend time analyze it, then we go we create a report with some recommendations. Those recommendations they're like based on the data of the past, but sometimes we have a changed situation, like we're given a recommendation for another situation because we have a data from the past. So what if we introduce some sort of monthly or weekly digital surveys to give us to those people, so we're going to have like more recent data. So when we create reports or when we make recommendation, we give recommendation about the recent situation, not the old situation. And I have another question. It's kind of connected to this question, and also I think it's a bit of summary of the previous questions. How are we going to build trust among those people to be part of this form of surveys and also other form of surveys? And thank you so much.
Such excellent questions. I mean, I think to your first question, I often, because I have my two hats on as an academic and as somebody who is engaged in a charity, I'm frustrated with the slowness of academia. And at the same time, as an academic, I also need to protect that slowness in a sense, because it allows us to have a deeper analysis of data than we could otherwise offer. So I think this is one where I'm really torn. We have tried to be really responsive to the data breach with this short survey that we have now put out. And we're writing up the report so that we can share that with the Defense Select Committee very immediately. But I think you do speak to a wider issue where, even Caroline and I, we had a discussion quite recently about the fact that some of the resettlement arrangements for Afghans have already changed since the collection of some of the data, also including mine, in 2022. And we are not always indeed able to be as responsive as you would want to be. It is important also to say that the government is also collecting its own data and has been collecting its own data, including at the moment there's a Home Office survey on resettlement outcomes that I hope can feed into their practice. And that speaks really also to your final question about trust. And that's a key one. I mean, when I noticed it again when I was putting out the survey, including 2 interpreters who I know for many years, they sent me private messages asking me indeed how could I keep their data safe. So what we have done with the survey that we have recently put out is that we simply don't ask for personal information. We don't ask people's names. We don't ask people's email addresses, so that they know that they can be safe, simply because we're not asking them to reveal things that could put them at risk. I think that that's a real key one. But again, I'm sure, as Caroline is also aware, even for the interpreters that I deal with that are relatively fluent in English, it's sometimes difficult to identify which survey is coming from where, who's asking them something for what reason. So they may, even though they might know me personally and have met me maybe personally, when they then get a survey from the Home Office the next week, it's quite difficult for people to differentiate the different goals, the different institutions who sent them this data. I mean, our universities have very robust kind of ethics committees that make sure that we are not harming people. And I'm sure Caroline has more to say on this.
Yeah, definitely. These are really important questions. And like Sarah, I share the kind of frustration that, we would want to be doing that regular catch up and, gaining those more sort of monthly updates. But there is a balance to be struck, because also, people who are just trying to have so much going on in their lives. I mean, really, some of the people that we were working with, it was, it was incredible, and the amount that they're juggling and having to sort of manage. So then to add the burden of research on top of that is also quite difficult. And I mean, the way that we did that was by employing people who were on the schemes themselves, and sort of trying to work in that way to also help provide some people with some skills and experience of employment, at the same time as providing a sort of trusted person within the networks. Often when we were doing the recruitment for who would be involved in our survey work, it was about those who had already been the kind of go-to people in the hotels or whatever, and that were often, the known people. So trying to work through those networks is a way of building trust, but there's also a responsibility on us as academics to make sure that engagement is taken seriously. And often that's even though there's a kind of emphasis from the university around engagement and impact, it's often the poor cousin in terms of actually how much time and resources there are at the end of that. But I think that, that's a way that we can, and, Sarah's a really good example of already doing that by working with the Scylla Alliance outside of outside of her academic role as well. So and as Sarah said as well, there's the government evaluation itself of its work. I think, just trying to emphasize and draw distinctions to actually say that in some ways academic research offers something of a safe space to say things that, we were working in collaboration with local authority caseworkers as a way of kind of gaining access and knowing our sampling frame in an area, but it was also very much about sort of emphasising the independence of the work that we were doing, because of the fact that, you know, being able to raise concerns and being able to feel like they were going to be taken seriously was really, you know, that's what we also wanted to know about. So I think, you know, there is a role, even as frustrating as it is for slow academic work, to you know, kind of provide other channels that wouldn't otherwise exist, but it's not perfect by any means.
I think that I would like to thank you both for such a fascinating discussion and presentations. It's been a brilliant session, and I think that we need to continue these conversations with PRISA, and maybe in the future have you both over to West London, and we have an in-person meeting. I think Zishan might be cooking something like that up. So I would just like to say thank you on behalf of all of us, and thank you to everybody who's attended and asked questions. And unless there's any other business, I will say have a wonderful afternoon.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, for the questions, and let's continue the conversation indeed.
Likewise.
Absolutely.
And thanks for your chairing, Luke. Good job.
My pleasure. Honestly, my pleasure. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Lovely
Bye-bye.
to see you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.